All right, we are live recording, live streaming on YouTube. So I think we can start this meeting. So welcome everyone to TAC meeting number 8 for the Sherwood West Relook project. I think we all know each other. This is our 8th meeting now, so I don't think we need to go around the room and introduce each other. But welcome, and thank you for taking the time out of your day to be here this afternoon. And so with that, I'm just going to turn over the meeting to Joe Dills.
Hey, everybody. Thanks, Erica. Erica, did you have any public comment that you wanted to share with the TAC?
We received one public comment yesterday, and I had forwarded it to the TAC. And then we also have another public comment that I will forward after the meeting, so everyone just can read it.
Okay. Then without further ado, we'll launch into the agenda. The framing for this agenda and where we are in the process is, you may recall, we've been trying to define the scenarios to be evaluated for the plan. And largely at the Community Advisory Committee level, they have been interested in kind of working their way through assumptions, working their way through some new concepts for the land use designations. And we've had a few of the key land uses, like institutional uses, be kind of some options as we've moved forward. So we have tried to pull all of those together and form them as the basis for the maps and the assumptions overview that we're going to provide today. If the CAC is comfortable with these scenarios for sharing with the community, then we will take them out for a outreach period and set of activities. And then when you reconvene, we'll be able to share that back and start the conversation towards a preferred concept plan. So that's where we are. Let's move ahead to the next slide. And the first couple of slides here are repeat, but we do have some updates for you. Our buildable land inventory has been done to understand where the buildable lands are, but also as a tool to try and estimate the bottom row in this table, which is the net buildable residential supply. The one number that I did want to call out a little bit here is the line that says less mixed employment areas at 178 acres. Previously, that was 198. It is 20 acres less now because of a acquisition, or maybe pending acquisition, of some land by the city up adjacent to Roy Rogers Road, which in the net buildable category would reduce that number by about 20. And then I do want to point out that that is kind of the low estimate in our mixed employment acreage land supply, because it takes a very conservative view of the what's called the upland habitat B category. Kate, you've got the cursor, right? I'm going to do a little verbal cartography here. If you could go up into the mixed employment area, and that area right there, yeah, it's kind of a, what is that shape? It's a backwards triangle. It's a triangle of some sort with a bump on it. That is a fairly large forested area. A good amount of it is really actually too sloped for flex space and industrial space and so on. In our BLI, we have taken the entirety of that area out. But in the city's progression of concept plan to comprehensive planning as a subsequent step in the future, there would be the more focused environmental analysis and economic analysis that would be done to see if more acreage there could be used as buildable land. So I wanted to flag that particular one. There are some smaller pieces dotted around the map, but that's the one that makes the difference to the amount of mixed employment area. At the high end, we could be adding in up to 50 more acres of land for employment, but it would be kind of on the slopes of that knob that is up there. Okay, so that's, I'm going to go a couple slides and then we can stop for any questions you might have. Let's go to the next one. This is a new estimate that we wanted to put together just to get our arms around how much potential open space is there in this planning area. And you can see the categories listed in the table from our regulatory Title 13 areas at the top down through parks and the gas line easement and so on. And if you take all of those items with the exception of tree groves and just add them down, we're somewhere close to 40% of open space throughout this entire area. So it's a pretty green plan before you've even started to color in the map for land uses. The tree groves item is sort of diagrammed in the map on the right. So we're able to see tree groves, obviously from the aerial photos. Some of them are Title 13 areas. Some of them are actually labeled in Google Maps as being tree farms, which is the darker green. So there'll be a judgment call to be made about how much of that is actually considered buildable land as we move ahead. But I did want to, the larger point, the high level point here is there's a lot of green space as at the beginning point of this plan, which in Sherwood context is a good thing. Okay, let's go to another slide or two. Kate, why don't you summarize kind of how we've pulled together the housing requirements?
Sure. Yeah. So these are some of the key sort of regulatory drivers for the housing assumptions, kind of the housing balance assumptions, specifically related to attached housing. So Metro Title 11 is the, has all the rules for concept planning that Sherwood West is subject to. And so one of those things that the city has to demonstrate is how they've considered ways to achieve a range of different housing types in terms of, different forms, tenure, rental versus ownership, and different price ranges, price levels. And then the city also needs to address housing needs for Sherwood West in the context of the overall housing needs of the Sherwood community, as well as the county and the region, assuming there is data that's available for all of those different geographies. And then there's also the Metropolitan Housing Rule, which establishes that 50% zoned opportunity requirement for attached housing. So all the city overall must have enough land zoned to allow 50% of new housing units to be either multifamily or single family attached. So some form of attached housing. And middle housing sort of, we are assuming generally fits into those categories. And so based on the housing needs analysis, the most recent one, the city is currently meeting that 50% rule within its current city boundaries. So in order to maintain that compliance, the city essentially has to meet that same 50% opportunity within Sherwood West. And again, the Sherwood HNA kind of assumed that same balance for new housing in the 20-year housing forecast. So 50% single family detached, 25% single family attached, and 25% multifamily to meet that 50%. And the HNA also found that the current buildable residential land within city boundaries cannot accommodate the expected future growth over the 20 years. And so, that's part of why the city is, of course, looking to expand its boundaries. But some of the greatest deficits in terms of residential capacity are in the medium and high density residential districts. So those are the places where that attached housing will be located.
This is familiar information to most of you, but we've compiled this again for the CAC, and also we did some sort of checking in with everybody. Tim, thank you for your time and making sure that we were reading the Title 11 kind of connection to the other housing rules correctly. So we're staying the course with the 50%. You'll see that show up in tables as we move ahead.
Right.
Let's go one more slide and then we'll pause for any questions that anybody might have.
Okay. So in terms of parks and schools, some additional research in this area. And for parks, Joe mentioned the property off Roy Rogers Road that the city is sort of in the process of acquiring that could potentially be used for community park space. And the 2021 Parks and Rec plan recommended park usage in that kind of general vicinity of Sherwood West. And also specifically mentions a potential sports complex and field house in Sherwood West. And so the acreage that's shown in those scenario maps that we'll look at today include enough acreage to accommodate those types of uses. And the 2021 Parks Plan also mentioned a potential community park south of ED Road, potentially adjacent to a natural area. So that's another thing that we've kind of considered in our scenario thinking. And then for schools, we had some discussions with the school district and kind of modified our assumptions about how much space a middle school would need. So previously we were thinking 40 acres, but now they informed us that their planning is more around 25 to 30 acres, kind of depending on the topography. So we've adjusted our assumptions there. And then also kind of a bigger consideration that made us rethink how we looked at that sort of central part of Sherwood West that we really focused on at the last committee meeting, is that is the area that's most likely to develop first because it's closest to existing infrastructure. But the school district already has enough capacity to kind of meet that need for the first 10 or so years of development in Sherwood West. So that area is not really ripe for school development. It's really, that would be housing and other types of uses. But the need for additional school capacity will be triggered kind of later in the development of Sherwood West. So we are still, planning on spaces for schools in the larger concept plan area, but not within that kind of central area.
Yeah, so another helpful consultation really with the school district and at a more specific level than committee discussions before. They actually checked in they have a demographer that works for them. And they checked in and ran the numbers, and that's how they got to the conclusion that they look good for about the next 10 years. So we can go back and look at any slides if you want to. Before we do, let's pause, open it up for any questions or comments. Kristen, did we get the community parks summary correct here and status out next to Roy
Yeah,
Rogers?
I guess I would say yes and no. We're still in very much preliminary discussions or conversations. So I would not want to imply that is indeed land we're going to acquire. We're definitely interested in land in that area and hope to, but it's very preliminary at this point, I guess I would say.
Yeah.
Hasn't moved as quickly as we would have hoped. So I just don't want to put out there that or set the expectation for people.
Okay. Anything else from anybody on any of the topics? And help me, Erica, if I don't see somebody's hand up or something. Otherwise, we'll just keep rolling. Tim?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. For community parks, they're the larger parks, I take it, so they could be active ball fields, those kind of things, correct?
Correct.
Sorry if you hear my dog barking in the background. The postman must be coming. So, and I guess this, the idea of the community park next to the natural area, they're just going to bring this up again. We heard it in a different concept planning or comprehensive planning process about making sure there's, the interaction between the active park areas and the natural areas where you're trying to provide habitat and so on and so forth. So just, something again to be aware of that I think is important consideration to make. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Anybody else? All right. We'll keep rolling forward. So we've also updated a little bit the land use designations that we're using for the concept plan scenarios. These basic categories are the same of multifamily, middle housing, and green neighborhoods. We previously had a small lot category that we have not included for this update. It simplifies the palette somewhat, but more importantly, small lots can be done within several of these categories. So that's one update. The other is to assign density ranges within these categories. So you can see the numbers listed here within the text, 18 to 24 for multifamily, middle housing, 11 to 18, and the two green neighborhood types. Where smaller lots are allowed in the flatter areas, than 7 to 10 units per acre, or what we call green neighborhood B, the more sloped areas at 4 to 7. These are very much Sherwood reflective density ranges. Discussions with staff, we checked in with one of the planning commissioners, and through all of that kind of collective thinking, have gone with these for this particular run of the concept plan. And you'll see these play out in the metrics that we talk about in a moment. So those are the updates to the land use designations. Let's go to, and they're not listed, by the way, those are the residential ones, not listed there as mixed employment. We are retaining the idea that there would be potentially a village zone. So if you read the packet, we have one of our scenarios that is basically reliant on some village master planning, where several hundred acres at a time would be taken and done through a master plan process. It's either a public process or a private proposal, but the idea that it is pre-annexation, and a vehicle to get a very specific notion of the variety of housing types, the walkability, the mix and placement of different types, the kind of form-based distribution of housing, and the non-residential uses as well. One other kind of interest by the CAC that this is springing from is in discussions about places like Villebois, which of course is a master plan community with a single master developer. They like that approach. They like what the outcome is. And so one of our scenarios picks up on that idea and would have probably a village overlay that requires this process and these types of outcomes to be defined. Let's go to the next slide. Here's a couple of examples that we're going to show the CAC tonight. A couple of them are old, really. Fairview Village and Sunnyside Village date back now 20 to 30 years. They are both very nicely done, very walkable, highly active, mixed housing type communities. The densities are actually fairly close to probably what would be in Sherwood, if other than maybe a couple of individual multi-family developments. Fairview Village was a single master developer. Sunnyside Village started out as 30 or 40 different ownerships, and it was a public planning process to pull it all together into a cohesive plan. Some 20 years later, it included the development of what's called Happy Valley Station, which is probably the best food cart pod in the whole region, at least for the type that have a building and so on, full of families all the time hanging out there. And then Villebois and Wilsonville as the newest of the bunch. So those are some examples we're going to share with the committee tonight. Let's go to the next slide. We're getting close to this. And so here's the math that we've been working with. If you take that previous table that I showed you, that winnows its way down to the total number of net residential acres, then we are dealing with about 276 at this point. When you apply the density ranges of these land use designations, then you can see the results for total acreage. The average net density that's applied, the total number of units per category, and then a key number that we were tracking, which is the 1, 2, 3, fourth column over, percent of units. So in this land use program, 25% of the units are fully multifamily, 20% are middle housing in the middle housing zone, and then an additional 5% is assumed to be somewhere in the green neighborhoods category, because of course middle housing is by right allowed in those zones. And we had in our kind of pursuit of consultation with people in putting this body of material together, we asked a lot of questions around about what should that number be that is in the green neighborhoods for middle housing. Nobody knows. It's all crystal ball at this point. Ryan, thank you for your input and kind of sharing what the development community is thinking. But to a person, the estimates were fairly low, down around 5% or under 10% somewhere. And clearly in our context, the flatter parts of Sherwood West are more conducive to plexes and townhomes and so on. Not really likely much of that is going to be built up on the hillside, but only time will tell. So this also tells us a couple of other metrics to watch in the scenarios. Bottom row, middle there, the add down is to 2763, so a little bit south of 2,800 units is estimated. We calibrated all of this to get a minimum of 10 units per acre. If you do a little different look at the numbers and back out the open space, that would be private open space. So this is community garden or a new trail that we hadn't taken out before, that kind of thing. Then the number is closer to 8.5. So that is the set of assumptions and density related information that we're using to deal with the scenarios. I think is this the last slide, Kate? Remind me, in this body? Okay.
Before the maps, yeah.
Let's pause here, and if you want to ask questions or talk about any of the three previous, let's do that. Joy?
Yeah, just a quick question. I noticed that under middle housing, triplex and quadplexes weren't identified as far as middle housing, but they were categorized in multifamily. Was that just on purpose?
The yes is the answer, but because it came out of a discussion with the CAC, that the list that you see there were the more acceptable types of middle housing as you've gone through your HB 2001 process. And if that's changed, let me know. But
no, it hasn't changed, but when we categorize as far as the proposed amendments that we're putting forward, tri and quadplexes are part of our middle housing.
yeah.
That's why I was just trying to figure out, they weren't categorized under that.
Yeah. It's purely reflective of a CAC desire,
Okay.
frankly, on the ground between townhouses and plexes, or even, well, anyway, between some of these units, you're not going to be able to tell the difference. So it's a good thing to flag. We should re-ask that question of the community.
Okay,
Community.
thanks.
Yeah. Jessica?
Thank you. I was wondering if you could talk more about the school district calculations. I'm curious about the 10-year aspect and whether that's tied to like a estimated number of units that are built? I mean, the temporal aspect is interesting too, because my understanding of existing development patterns in South Cooper Mountain and River Terrace 1 are that they're developing much faster than anticipated. So I was interested in the 10-year sort of temporal aspect of the 20-year plan and whether
Right.
what's that tied to?
Right. Let me throw that over to Erica or Kate, just to kind of channel what we heard from Jim at the school district.
Yeah, so right now, the school district has said that they have some additional capacity that they could look at utilizing as far as the first phases of development in Sherwood West. And so if they take a look at what they can utilize, accommodate now, and do some shifting, then they wouldn't need to actually look at starting to build a new school until a later phase, like 10 years out, looking at how many units too would be built over the first couple of years in Sherwood West.
And just to add on to that a little bit, Jessica, so they did have the specific numbers for Sherwood West, and we're using those as the drivers.
Yep.
What's interesting about the temporal aspect is that development in Sherwood West won't start until whatever that milestone is out there, Erica. It's like at least 3, maybe 4 or 5 years down the road.
Right.
Yeah. Did that answer the question? Yeah. Okay. All right. Glenn?
Yeah, this is not an ODOT issue at all, but I was curious by the name's Green Neighborhood. It is a value-laden term, I think, that puts higher priority and value on the detached single-family home, which has the inverse connotation to the non-detached single-family home. So I think I might think about the word choice. Our friend David Osherman, once told me, look at a document. If you can change the word green to white and it still reads, think again. So that's just food for thought.
Yeah, no, fair comment. It's actually a value-laden term by design, because the message from the CAC has been, we love our green. Bruce?
Hey, I just have a question. So the school district doesn't need land for 10 years, I guess, after the beginning of development of the residential or the entire site. So does land get reserved for them someplace? I don't know how that works. I mean, in another state that I worked in, if you reserve land for a public purpose, it had to be purchased at some point. Mm-hmm. So I just wasn't sure how that works in this state.
Erica and Kate, help me out on this, but what we heard from Jim was, one, they are not in a position now, as far as he knows, and discussions with their board about reserving land or buying land way in advance. So that was one thing we heard on that question, Bruce.
Okay.
And then the second is at the concept plan level, we're not, these are not intended as being binding land use placements.
Okay. Yeah.
For institutional uses, but they are illustrative because they help us
right.
understand
right.
Potential.
Got it.
Okay.
So Joe, from a transportation planning rules standpoint, then you're basically treating this like a gross to net reduction in numbers rather than an actual mapped facility.
For the transportation impact analysis, we will map the facilities. So we started with gross to net to figure out how many units do we think fit, so to speak. How do we meet the 50-50 and how do we meet the 10 average? And then we use that to draw maps. And then we will take the maps and measure them for trip generating land uses by TAZ.
So it's possible then that the school district won't purchase the land and you'll have an underlying residential zoning on the school property that
right.
would be developed.
or mixed employment.
Or mixed, okay.
Yeah, good question. Tim?
Thanks. I'm going to kind of go back on Glenn's comment on the green. I've been thinking about it too. And I understand where the CAC is coming from on the green being green. I'm guessing open space and so on and so forth. But green also has a lot of connotations in terms of carbon footprint, emissions, et cetera, and energy to build single family homes versus multifamily, et cetera. So it might be, again, like what Glenn said, something to think about on that. The other part, and I've mentioned this before, and I just, I look at it and the city potentially upping the open space requirements from 5% to 10%. Again, it just seems like you're trying to get the really low density, and then you have these private open space areas, because I'm guessing they're probably not available to the public to use. I don't know. But it just, I don't know how that's going to fly in the future in terms of our council and so on and so forth. So I just want to flag that once again. Thanks.
Let's dip into that a little bit. Joy and Erica, when you do a PUD or subdivision and it's got open space, it's approved as part of the plan, what types of spaces are those, and are they publicly accessible?
So we have required public access easements over open spaces and subdivisions and planned unit developments.
Joy, anything to add to that?
And typically we require them to be usable open space.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, and sometimes, I mean, especially the pocket parks, with a small development, that is where we sometimes have the difficulty of access to the public, just because of maintenance aspect of it, and we get pushback from the developers. But especially like in the Brookman area, where Middlebrook subdivision, as an example, which is 145 units, we did require access easement so that it's more community trails and park areas versus just for that one particular subdivision.
Those are kind of the premises under the open space characterization here, Tim.
well, good, because I would hope that it's available to the public if that's how you're going to proceed.
Yeah.
And I hope the trails actually will connect into something else versus just some little trail in the open space area, and the community gardens, et cetera, would be open to the public and not just specifically for the adjacent residents.
Okay.
Just jumping in here, Joe, I know one of the things that was talked about in the past was maybe accommodating more quote unquote open space, space that's not covered by a building on private lots. And I don't know if that's something that still kind of jibes with this group or it might, or with the CAC either, but.
Yeah, it's not in these assumptions at this point.
Okay.
Okay, keep rolling. Let's move on to maps and things to look at. So two scenarios have been developed here. One difference between the two is this one is closer to the sort of maximum employment potential that we started off, one of our very first topics, mapping. And again, that's a council priority to establish employment areas that serve the city tax base as a whole and local employment opportunities, all those goals. So we took all of those purple lands and included them in this map on scenario A. There was one other small one. There was a neighborhood commercial node that is not shown here. And then applied the 4 residential land use designations that we've been talking about to those to achieve the housing program that was in the previous table. Before I show you the distribution of that, let me show you the backdrop to that. So we don't have the diagrams broken out, but if you squint at this map, you will see that the road network has been included on this. So the realignment of Elwert, the new framework roads that are throughout the plan, and the north-south perimeter road that would go from south all the way around to north that the city has been studying. And then the other backdrop to the land use categories is the distribution of parks and institutional lands. So institutional and public lands are conceptually shown. There's space up by Roy Rogers Road. Cursor would probably help here, Kate, if you can follow my verbal. So institutional there, institutional just to the left in those kinds of spaces. Why? Because they are flat ground. So potentially for schools, again, not binding upon schools, but potential. Down to the sand trap parcel, which one of the members dubbed it in through there as another potential almost community scale park. It's about 15 acres inside the darker green. And then neighborhood parks distributed throughout the plan as well. You can see the dotted green lines, which is the trail network that we have drawn along the way. And so the comment that was made a moment ago about hoping the trails actually go somewhere, that's an intent of this plan. It's kind of a driver for the trail system. The biggest of the trails being what we're calling the Chicken Creek Greenway. So south side of Chicken Creek. And so you're on your bike, you go along that, and you can go all the way to the refuge if all the connections are made in the future. So that's the backdrop to the land uses. On the attached housing side, we have taken those numbers of attached housing that we showed you in the table and basically distributed them around. And so starting from the north, there would be some of it that is north of Chicken Creek. Another area down south of that, adjacent to the realignment, near Haiti Road, near Kruger, and then south of there, down, working its way down towards Chapman. Working theory being not all in one place, but distributed as part of neighborhoods, distributed to try and form something of a transect from higher density attached housing, moving to the west through neighborhoods A and B up to the hillsides. That particular concept is actually pretty reflective of what was in the preliminary plan. They had a little different way of drawing it, but similar kind of concept. So that is scenario A. Soumya, let me kind of invite you to talk about this one a little bit, things I might have overlooked.
I think that covers it really well. I was just thinking in terms of the trails, you notice there's kind of a yellow line within the Chicken Creek corridor, and that's a BPA transmission line. But there's also a gas easement that runs through the site that it goes through you can kind of see a little red L shape in the high school property. And that continues north and south there into the Chicken Creek Greenway to the north and then down below. And we're assuming that would be an opportunity for, a soft surface trail and some kind of public amenity. So we're
Right.
tracking that particular easement. And then I think to Joe's point, the trail network is it's informed by the location of distributed neighborhood parks so that all these different areas of the neighborhoods are well connected by bike and ped facilities.
When we had the visioning conversation with the committees early on, a pretty strong theme there was connections into the existing city. So the potential, obviously Edie Road and Hadley Road are connections, but there's some trails at the northern and middle portions that also do the same. And then we've picked up on the pedestrian overcrossing at Sunset, and then a potential crossing down that would be at Chapman Brookman down there as well. So trying to make as many of those connections as we can. Okay, that's A. Let's cover B, and then we can pause for some questions. Maybe we'll look at a couple other slides. So the villages concept is to identify 2 areas for master plan development that, fair to say at this point, we don't know exactly how those would be colored in. But they would be subject to more detailed planning that would be done prior to annexation. And the North Village there, we did some studies when we were last together with you in February, and would probably have a very similar land use distribution, frankly, to the map that we were showing, but it could be arranged quite differently. So imagine Villebois being diagrammed into that area, mostly residential, but would have some park focuses and whatever other community uses might fit and be identifiable in the future. And then the South Village is more of a mixed concept, trying to envision employment, destination commercial, restaurants, and we might have to mute a couple of our, if the wine related development were to occur at the top of the hill, that could be part of it, and so on. And so that the South Village and that set of land uses that I just summarized for you is kind of an idea, really, a concept that got picked up on by the discussions in February. Let's do just a couple. I'll just quickly go through the next pages, and then we can flip around and look at what we want. So you saw in your packet the North Village description. Here are some images that go along with that. I think the Chicken Creek Greenway would be a really organizing element, frankly, along one west edge of it. We would not want homes. I think the guides would say, don't back homes onto that, but that the open space should be physically and visually accessible to everybody. Let's go to the next slide. South Village, a little bit more non-residential. And its look, community gathering was this goal, really, that came up over and over again with folks in discussions in February. So that is the driver for South Village. And then just a couple of more slides to show here, the green neighborhood concept. So almost all of these are perfectly public open space, Tim. There might be a courtyard or two that's a little bit more in the private, but it's semi-public, I think land like that is called. And then finally, employment as the next slide. This is really just updated with a couple of winery kind of considerations and some design concepts from previous work. And then we put in a page of open space imagery as well. Let's back up to the maps if we could, Kate, and let's open it up to, let's take it scenario by scenario. So any questions on scenario A? Ryan, start with you. Maybe we'll need to come back. We're not hearing your audio. Okay. We can come back if we need to. Jessica.
Thank you. I was hoping for an update on the transportation system planning. I know that at the last meeting, Erica said she had started the conversations with DSL and Army Corps of Engineers on the potential Elbert alignment.
Yes.
It looks on these maps like both are existing still. It looks like you've got the Elbert EDT with the Elbert Strait and the Elbert alignment shown on here. And then I have a few. So then the second one is on the far west, north-south road and what the consideration there is on future funding and design and topo. And then lastly, my question is on the amount of institutional and public shown on here. It seems like a large amount. I was just curious. It seems like it's taking away from the potential housing or mixed use availability.
I can answer the last one, and then I'll throw it over to you, Erica, on the transportation related questions. The amount of green here for institutional is equivalent to the table we were showing you earlier. So it anticipates a community park in the northern part of the study area, and a community park that is at the Sand Trap location, 2 schools, and then the array of neighborhood parks, which is basically 1 park per neighborhood kind of framing of the entire area. Those add up to 19 acres. Maybe the high school is kind of visually adding a lot of green to it as well. So Erica.
Yeah, so on your first question, Jessica, in regards to the transportation planning and our coordination with DSL, I did reach out to DSL staff, and we talked about the revisions to Elwert and with the 2 roundabouts. And they looked at some of the previous work that was done in the preliminary plan, showing some of the alternative analysis that was done. And they concur that, through the permitting process, that additional work would need to be done. They really want to see a really good alternatives analysis when it comes to that realignment. And so DSL would require that. And then of course, Army Corps, because it's a joint permit. And then we just talked a little bit about the permitting process and what would be needed. And that's a lot further down the road, no pun intended, but.
So for purposes of this sort of planning, it seems like, is that why both of them are still shown? Because it could be either or at this point. I'm just concerned that we go too far down the path of showing the realigned Elwert without having that reality-based check, and then the whole plan has to shift. So that's good to hear.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked the question, Jessica, because actually, here's where I need to check in with the team. I don't think we're intending to show both would exist. If the realignment is done, then you essentially don't need vehicular right-of-way north of Edie, unless let me just pause here, because it's been a long time since we thought about this. Erica, help me out on what is the connections assumption in the vicinity of Elwert Edie if we do the realignment? Do you recall?
That is a great question. And I wish Bob Galati was on the line here.
It just seems premature to take it out if we don't know that there's so many things predicated on the transportation backbone alignment.
Right.
But it seems like if we take it out and then it's not really feasible when it comes down to it after alternatives analysis, how does it get back into the plan and how does that change the plan?
Yeah. Okay. And I get that point, and that's well stated. Let me just answer my own question. I think that the plan would be, if you did do the realignment, let's say that the funding and the permitting could be accomplished, then what you would still do with the north end of Elwert as it approaches Edie and the stretch that is north of Edie, they simply would be downgraded to local streets. So you'd still have the ability to, for example, come down Edie, pointed west, and take a right. Or if you lived in that cluster of homes that is at the north end of, either our planning area or existing Sherwood near the words Elwert Road, you'd have the ability to drive north a little bit.
Is that right? I wasn't sure. I thought the idea was to take it out and mitigate it. I guess I don't know
Yeah,
the details of that.
I'm glad you flagged it. We'll kind of dial in on that.
And then
Okay.
I want to get back to actually Jessica's third question about that north-south collector from, Chapman
Mhm.
to Edie, somewhere on that western side. So, looking at that road, Bob believes it's probably doable. Funding mechanisms for that road, I think that's something that we're going to have to figure out as well, and what those could be in the future.
I guess a follow-up question is, what kind of transportation analysis is being done to show the need for it, or would it be used, and would it be a collector? That sort of.
Yeah, so we haven't really taken a strong look at that right now, just because this is a concept plan. We're just showing like the north-south connection where it could possibly go. We expect that it would probably be a collector, and that helps with funding as well in the future if it's a collector street versus a local neighborhood street.
Jessica, in our scope, we will do a transportation impact analysis, and that link will be on there. And we'll use this amount of land use to run the model and
Great.
get some information on that.
It would be great if we could run it both ways, maybe with and without it.
Mhm. Okay. Tim, let's go to you.
Maybe you can't tell. Bruce keeps raising his actual hand, Joe, versus his virtual hand. So why don't you let Bruce go?
Bruce, actual
I just
hand beats virtual hand. So go ahead.
Well, I just have a real quick question. Scenario A doesn't assume the farm to table wine site at all. Is there a reason, or am I misunderstanding?
Well, it's labeled as mixed employment. So are you talking about the top of the hill site?
Yeah, that's, oh, okay. I got my geography a little bit off. Yeah, I got it. So that would be considered mixed employment. All right, I understand. Thanks.
Okay, Tim.
My
over
real
to you.
hand goes down.
Okay. Joe, I appreciate your comments in the very beginning about the Title 13 land up at the top. And so if I understood what you said correctly, you've calculated that as a takeout at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But if I look at this map, it doesn't look that way because the employment land designation is over the top of it. So it doesn't look like the natural Title 13 area is, it seems to me it should be flipped. The Title 13 area should be on top of that. And then it may grow in the future once the easy analysis is done, and and so on and so forth. So
Right.
that was one of my first things that I thought of. So it seemed like the natural resource area should be on top of the employment color there,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm understanding that correctly. Second point to a question, and maybe I believe you might have addressed this earlier with, I think it was a Karen, about the park, the city purchase of property in the little notch where Chicken Creek and Cedar Creek come together. And it seems you do have institutional there, so maybe this is part of what they're looking at. I don't know. But it seems like that would be a pretty important confluence of two areas that, if it's not institutional, would be the natural resource area, the natural area designation showing there, because it is Title 13 land, and there's obviously two creeks coming together, and it connects over to the wildlife refuge from there. So I think the previous, I think it was Karen was her name, explained what was happening potentially there without exactly saying what was happening there. But that was just another comment. It seemed like the natural area just stops, and there's a really important confluence of two creeks coming right in there. So something to graphically just to think about as you're showing that.
Yeah. The you can see, I hope, maybe you can see the coloring here in that area. It's a fair comment. We had to make a couple of judgments about what to color because the southern end of there is already owned by the city.
Okay.
Check me on this, Erica, is already owned by the city and is a park. Okay, did I say that right?
So it's owned by the city right now. It's not, it's for future park use. We haven't gone through any planning type of program yet for the park uses on there, but it was purchased to be a park at a later date and time.
Okay. It just struck me when I looked at the coloring of it there. So.
Yeah.
And one other comment or question, and I believe Erica, you just said with the far west road there, the perimeter road goes on, it connects into Chapman, but it doesn't look like on the map it shows it connecting in to Chapman. And I think that's what you said.
Oh, yes. So, and the previous work that was done, the line, it connects to Chapman.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, because I was like, I saw it and I was wondering why it was dead end. So I appreciate that. And then finally, one last comment. I have to jump to another meeting at 3:15, so I will be jumping off just short of that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Let's do Glenn and then over to physical hand raised Bruce.
All right, thanks, Joe. I'm glad to hear the question there that Tim asked, because with the employment district. So, absent the 99W I-5 connector, this section of Highway 99 still has a statewide function. So our concern obviously is high trip gen uses that require access from 99. So I don't know a lot yet about this mixed employment categories. In general, local serving on the side of the highway where it's mostly residential is probably, nicer for the highway, but that's just going to be a concern. We'll look at it when we see the traffic modeling numbers, but I feel like, what Tim said about the environmental lands within the employment district to the north, it might be less of a scary than it looks like on the big pink square, so to speak. If it really is, there's more, natural area, water treatment, other things that keep the footprint down. So that's my position. Just from a Glenn logic note, bouncing off of what Jessica was saying, that westward collector, that west side collector, if you're not planning on expanding further west, which that topography makes me think it's unlikely to have a further west expansion, I think you're economically better off double loading that collector and moving it. Maybe you move the collector and the other road both to the east a little bit, and then you have properties backing up to the countryside rather than a road. It's always we've seen other UGB expansion areas have a road for a boundary, and we've struggled for how to do the interface between the rural and the urban. So in this case, we could avoid making that interface problem if we bring the road in. So.
Can I ask a question back, Glenn? Your first comments, were you directing those at the very southern end of the study area?
It's my first comment is two-part. One, in general, I don't know yet what the composition of mixed employment looks like, and so we're going to be looking at that because my concern, of course, is attractors, trip gen from the highway, from outside people. But the second half of that was the big-looking employment district to the north also might not be as bad impact-wise as my eye thinks because of that green. So maybe if there is actually less utilization because of the natural area, then I'm not as worried.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Bruce.
I just had one question. Obviously, I want as much employment land as possible, but I'll limit that comment. But the intersection of Chapman with 99, I'm not quite sure that I understand how that whole area gets looked at from a transportation point of view, and maybe this is too early to be thinking for me to be asking that question, but I just was wondering how that might be considered, any alternatives down there.
Erica, can you talk a little bit about?
Yeah, I
additional
can.
study?
So Bruce, the intersection with Chapman, Brookman, and 99, right now it is visioned to be a signalized intersection. We are doing some additional work looking at some sort of crossing in that area between Brookman and Sherwood West. And next month, we're going to have information on that crossing, where it could be located, you know, what's the best alternative for a crossing, if it's a general like local connection, and not like an interchange off of 99 with Brookman Chapman, because that takes up a large swath of land. So we're doing that analysis right now, and we're going to be coming back with some information on that.
Got it. All right.
The ODOT engineers, the concerns they raise in this vicinity is the northbound travel being at a pretty high rate of speed, southbound a little bit, but northbound especially, high rate of speed. And there's nothing close by to the south that makes for logical like speed reduction transition. So that's something we're going to be looking at in the future. I don't have the answers, not an engineer. I'm sure there's ways to do it, signage, whatnot. But that's one of the things that they're going to want to see is speeds lowering so that you don't end up getting a 45-mile-an-hour T-bone, 52-hour T-bone collision.
Okay. Let's go to the next scenario. Ryan had a question, and either if your audio or send it through chat, Ryan, whatever works. Is there a reason the village concept isn't wrapped around the school by connection through the west side? Short answer is we kind of felt like we had to draw the line somewhere. And you can kind of go either way with it, I think is the reality of it. Soumya, any thoughts on the boundary of the South Village?
I think we delineated it based on some of where we were thinking the commercial or some of maybe the general employment, and then where that wine-related development might occur up the hill, and those kind of brackets. But
right.
One of the things that came out of the CAC last time that I recall was people were very excited about the idea of Kruger Road as kind of more of a civic, not necessarily a main street, but a central corridor. And so I could easily see the South Village concept kind of bumping over where we've got, you know, multifamily and middle housing along Kruger Road to the north, and just capturing that other side of the street as well. I think that's a really good idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for the question. Other questions, thoughts on village planning and scenario B?
Oh, sorry to put my hand up. With the village planning, would there be, maybe you don't know yet in terms of the master planning, but would they have to come in with different types of housing units in the master planning, or amounts of, you know, different types of uses, of whether it's commercial or this or that? Is they envision there'd be some kind of parameters of what kind of uses would go in those areas, or is it just more wide open?
The South Village, the discussion that they had in February, the idea was that it would be pretty flexible, but that it would include non-residential uses that were attractors to the area. So that it would become a destination for restaurants or whatever might be located there. And then they were pretty on board with the North Village being more residential. I can share with you a little different context where they do a similar kind of thing in the city of Bend with their expansion areas. And the comprehensive plan actually defines the percentage categories of each land use that are intended, and there's some flexibility on how to move it around in a master plan and so on. So if we were having that discussion right now in Sherwood, that's how I would advise it, that there is some guidance in the comprehensive plan and some flexibility when you actually get to the master plan itself.
Okay, thanks.
Hearing you mention restaurants and whatnot, I'm trying to figure out the village concept. I'm still a little unsure on the character. If it's purely residential with open space, or if it's civic space, or if it's a certain level of commercial. If you are looking for a certain level of commercial, then I think similar to what Ryan's saying, having straddling the collector like Kruger or your north-south, and having a two-sided main street, if you're going to do any kind of node, even those the closure effect is pretty important.
Let's advance a couple slides. If we could, Kate. Yeah. Yep. No, I mean, no question. These types of land uses work better if you have two-sided streets. Yep. Okay. Anything else on the scenarios? I think we've got some good things that were identified to clarify the map. Oh, go ahead.
I had one question, and it's not a huge deal. So I see there's two trail types. There's regional trails, and then there's the local trails. I can see that some of the regional trails are obviously off right away type of activities. I'm curious to know what the thought is on the local trails. Are these, and I'm thinking, Joe and you and I both know South Cooper Mountain had a trail that connects to the high school there through the neighborhoods. That's I think it was like a 10 or 12 foot shared use path in place of a sidewalk on one of the streets. Is that, I'm trying to figure out if you're thinking about that, or like my neighborhood in Southwest, it's just some little brown signs that tell us which sidewalk to use to go a certain way.
It'd be more multi-use paths that parallel the street, frankly.
Okay, cool.
Where we have streets drawn here. Some of these are kind of like running down the gas line right away or whatever. That's
the one you say, oh yes, kids, go ahead and go. I don't need to go with you. You're on your bikes.
Which is exactly how it was expressed by a couple of members. I want to feel safe telling my kid to go do that.
Yep, perfect.
Okay. Any last comments, ideas? Thank you, Tim, for joining us. And we'll be asking the CAC tonight whether they're comfortable with these moving ahead into public engagement period. And we'll try and share kind of the feedback we got from you all in this meeting. Not seeing any more virtual or physical hands. Oh, Soumya, go ahead.
I've raised my literal hand.
Yeah.
I was just looking at Google Earth on the side here and looking at that upland habitat area that's currently shown as underneath the employment district.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how much it matters, but I believe those are designated based on existing tree canopy a lot of the time, and that was a big tree farm area. And there's about 2 tax lots at the northern part of that triangle area that are all completely cleared at this point.
Yeah,
So,
it's okay if we flip over to your screen. Let's take a look at it together.
sure. I think I can't share unless another participant unshares. Thank you. Let's see. Can everyone see that?
Hold on, it's still loading.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay, so we're looking at our study area in pink here. And then, oh, now it's going to freeze. But if you can kind of see where my hand is up here, that's our tree farm area. And then the northern piece is the piece that was cleared out.
There's a lot of those overgrown tree farms in the state from someone doing their tax deferral way back in the day. My grandparents had one of those.
Yeah. There is a bit of advice we could use, maybe Glenn from you and Jessica, we do need to make our best assumption on how much land use is generating trips up in that area. And should we try and make a judgment about what the actual maximum buildable area would be? Understanding that we have not done goal 5 work on this, because it is what Metro calls upland habitat B. And it's not a must save. It is a evaluate and determine how much to save kind of area.
I have not been on the ground. I hate to not have a site visit to make a reference, but if it's the kind of canopy that I'm thinking of from seeing, other people have done it, it's probably a monoculture with a bare undergrowth, just shaded without much biological diversity. So I probably would assume it's usable if that's the case. It's not, in those kind of situations, you rarely have trees you can save because they're all limbed up high, and they're all next to each other, they're supporting each other as one kind of animal. And there's, I don't see any oaks or anything that were used to pull stumps at one time, or so I think
the city does have tree canopy retention standards within mixed employment areas, so that could be the basis for an assumption. They require 30% canopy to be retained.
you probably, I would assume you're doing it through replanting in a case like that. If it is that, you have to do reproduction, which, honestly, replanting is great carbon sink. Those young trees grow fast and pull it in.
Yeah. Jessica, what do you think here on what's kind of a reasonable assumption for us to make?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Glenn. And then the other thing I wanted to bring up was the winery that is down Conselman Road. I would just encourage including that in the calculations, because I think they get a fair bit of traffic, and we have heard about it at the county level. Our Rural Roads Advisory Committee hears about traffic on Conselman all the time from this winery that is becoming more and more popular. And I know that Hawksview.
It is Hawksview.
Mm-hmm.
There's another, the property owner next to Hawksview up the hill. They also have a small kind of a winemaking facility and small amphitheater that they've talked about doing some kind of shows and things on occasions.
Yeah, and there may be others. I know it's kind of booming out there. At least those are the ones I know of in particular that would be somewhat impacted or impact the transportation assumptions for Sherwood West. So I just want to make sure that those are included and accounted for.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Those are all pretty small, pretty specific land uses. In the world of modeling, can they actually go in and say, yes, there's a attractive winery right here?
I'm not a modeling expert. I'll run that by Steve and Julie and see what they say. I think it probably depends on the type of model also, right?
Okay. All right.
The origins, destinations, or...
Yeah, it probably goes in the background. I think it's more of a weekend thing, so you're more likely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I appreciate the comment. We'll forward it to DKS and see kind of whether there's a way that it can be considered. I've been out to Hawksview several times.
That's pretty.
Lovely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I went to an hors d'oeuvre reception party at the house above it, and one guy brought an hors d'oeuvre that had $1,000 worth of caviar on it, just trying to show off what he had, right? And like I cooked, I prepared something.
Okay. Good comments. Thank you. Anything else before we go to next steps? Okay. Erica?
So the next steps here, we're going to be taking this information tonight to the CAC. If we get kind of a thumbs up on our, general, housing program and land uses, we're going to be taking this out to an open house. And most likely we're going to have an online open house and an in-person open house as well. Hopefully out in Sherwood West, either at the new high school or the Bridges schools, for folks to attend. Just trying to think of any other additional information. I think that's it for right now. It's going to be forthcoming to the group.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for your time, and we will see you soon. Okay. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.